Hey everyone, this is Isaac. I'm CEO at Trullion, and today on AI Accounting Intelligence, we'll be talking with real people about real things related to AI and the impact on the accounting industry. Stay tuned. I'm excited to be here with Ronen Faier, most recently CFO and interim CEO at SolarEdge, one of the biggest and most successful public companies in Israel and the world, and now board member on top companies like Monday and Kaltura and Cato. Welcome.
Thank you very much, and happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Awesome. So we'll get into a lot of fun stuff about CFO and accounting and AI, I'm sure. But I don't know, we're sitting in Tel Aviv in this beautiful city and country and world. You know, did you grow up near here? Where'd you grow up in Israel?
So I'm originally born and raised here in Israel. Was born in Netanya, which is a relatively small city here in Israel, but very much understood when I started my thoughts about career that I would like to be a management member one day in a tech company. And when calculating what should be the best route to get there, I thought that accounting and finance will be the right place. My whole family are actually related more to the medicine. My brother is a doctor. My mother used to be a nurse, and almost the natural course was to go and be a doctor. And when I started thinking, being a doctor, how much I need to invest, how much I need to study in order to yield the success, and how long it's going to take, and when I understood, first of all, by doing the calculation that I don't want to be a doctor, I said, okay, but the way that I'm analyzing things mean that risks, returns, investment, maybe I should go towards finance. So studied finance in Jerusalem University in Mount Scopus, then started as of course, doing internship as a CPA, started in a tech company, then MBA in Tel Aviv University. And from there, I was very fortunate to work in amazing companies here in Israel that allowed me to really grow and express my capabilities. And I must humbly say that, I was able to study from the best entrepreneurs that I think that this country have seen, from Dov Moran, the guy who invented the USB flash drive, all the way to Guy Sella, who founded the SolarEdge. So I was fortunate, and I'll see where the continuation of this journey will take me.
That's awesome. I'm sure someplace really, really fun. So you grew up in Netanya,
yes,
which is a beach town, right?
It's a beach town, yeah.
So it's funny when you see someone who's become an accomplished CFO, CEO over the years, there's always like something about their childhood that they bring into that thing. I remember reading, about another entrepreneur who grew up on a kibbutz, and he always talked about his kibbutz work ethic, his community work ethic, as going into the company. I also met another guy who grew up in a kibbutz and he never wore shoes. So there's all kinds of things that influence you. But like, if you think about that childhood in Netanya and Israel, what is that one thing that like you bring forward as a CFO, a decade or two later?
So I think it's Netanya was a rough city to grow in. First of all, reputation in Israel is not so good for this.
Right, a lot of immigrants, right? Is that fair to say?
A lot of immigrants. It was a city with a relatively poor background in general. But one thing that it gave you is that you understood that in order to get out of Netanya, to become something that is more than just being in your own city, you need to do everything much better than the others. And I must say that what I at least took from Netanya, which is, by the way, a beautiful and amazing city by itself. But I think that the thing that I took was that challenges must be accepted, and challenges must be set continuously over your career. And whenever you're reaching one point in your career, you climb the peak, you need to look for the next peak, because the challenges never stopped. And one of the things that at least characterized my journey was the fact that it was always challenging companies, challenging industries, even, by the way, challenging CFO environments. Working in a company that has inventory, that has international presence, a company that has presence in a very competitive landscape, very kind of boom bust. I was in memory. Semiconductor is a boom bust. Solar is the mother of all boom bust industries. This understanding that you need to face a challenge every day and you need to accomplish something that makes you a little bit tougher, a little bit more ready for this challenge. And you understand that whatever happens, you need to continue and fight. So I think that this rough neighborhood, rough Netanya, rough idea that you need to go out of it makes you a little bit more ambitious in where you want to get.
So it's interesting. Maybe we'll get big picture, because you talk about a challenging environment as a huge benefit, and like a tough working class melting pot of an environment. I'm sure, you had your bike stolen and you were all bummed out and you walked out and someone pickpocketed the last shekel off. It was just, there was always a challenge. And, we think about, our kids or the youth or whatever. At least in Israel, I grew up in America and Texas. Things only got better.
Yeah.
Okay. My friends' homes are a little bit nicer than their parents' homes, right? And it seems like there's less and less kind of challenging environments out there. So will these great, entrepreneurial hotbeds like America and Israel and Europe, as the generation comes up and there's less challenges, is it going to be that much harder for new and strong CFOs and companies to emerge? Do you think it goes to new countries where there's the next Netanya or whatever? Do we have to reinvent ourselves? Just kind of this idea, because we all want to be Ronen or an entrepreneur or whatever, but we were born with a little less challenges in front of us nowadays.
So I would, also as a father for 3 kids, from a teenager to a 21-something girl, I think that their life is not less challenging than ours. I just think that it's a little bit of a different challenge. Okay. I think that, and especially for those growing in Israel, I was born in 71, where Israel was not yet the country it is today. It was not as developed, not as rich, not as, by the way, in many senses, not as polarized as it was today.
Definitely.
But in many senses, it was a country that was developing, and I think that most of the hurdles were economic and sometimes just, what standard of living you are. I think that when I look at my kids today and the generation today, I think that they face different challenges. I think that today technology is facing new challenges for them as well. Just, I keep saying that when I look at my kids, they're working actually in social networks. How many posts did you do? How many videos? How many likes did you get? It's a job. I think that it's a little bit of a different environment. I'm not sure that the motivation will be economic as it was for me, because I definitely wanted to make sure that I leave my children in a better economic state than my parents left me with. But in general, I think that each generation gets their own challenges in a different way. I think that at the end of the day, it is the personality of the human being, of the person, that drives them. And I think that maybe they will face different challenges and they will face the challenges in a different way than we did. But I don't think that today you see less of a challenging environment. I would say one thing, though, that one of the changes in I would say the type of the challenges is that in many cases, I think that our generation, with a little bit of harder studies and harder work, you had a relatively better playing field that you could actually grow. I think that today the field is becoming much more even to everyone. So it is becoming sometimes more challenging to be better, or sometimes more challenging to be able to take advantage of some of the terrain that you see in front of you, because today technology gives almost most people the same capabilities or the same opportunities. I think that educational systems, being better or worse, provide a different level, but I think that is a little bit more straightforward for people. And I think that in general, it's simply that the challenges are different. They're not less. So I wouldn't expect to see less entrepreneurs in Israel, in the United States, or anywhere else. I think that it's just going to be a little bit of a different ride for them.
That's awesome. And I mean, that's inspiring, because like this, this discussion, we call it accounting intelligence. It's a play on word with AI.
Sure.
And a lot of the people we talk to or who listen to us, they're either CPAs. They're thinking about being CPAs. They're thinking about being an accountant. Now, when I was coming out of college, let's say 20 years ago, being at the Big Four was very prestigious. Being at PwC and Deloitte and all these companies and being a CPA, it's like being a doctor. You're a lawyer, you're an accountant and stuff like that. I think it's different now. Yeah. I think globally we're feeling it. And then you have this, like, I don't know, it's insane how much literature there is about AI right now, right? You can't walk 5 feet without hearing something about AI. And so there is a bit of this like anxiety, like, is it going to be harder? Should I go all in on technology? Should I stick with the accountant? I mean, I want to unpack that a little bit, but first of all, are you a CPA or do you have a CPA?
Yes, I am. I'm CPA since 99.
Okay. Yeah. I bet there's a lot of people that want to be a CPA and they want to be a CFO and a future board member. So that's awesome. So maybe before we get into the challenges of the next generation of accountants, you did it from CPA, accountant to CFO. What are how do you go from CPA, accountant to CFO? And that's a big question, but what are some of the key inflection points?
So I think that, first of all, I consider the CPA license as almost basic education because I knew from the very beginning that I don't want to be an audit partner in a Big Four. I'm not saying that it's not a good profession. I didn't want to do it in any case, but I think that I needed to do it in order to be able to run a company and to run a finance department in a company, because when you are facing the auditors, when you're facing the Big Four, when you're facing the legislation, you need to have two things. First of all, the state of mind of what is accounting? What is it? What does it mean to run an accounting department in a company with all of the requirements around it? You need to be a CPA in order to understand how your CPA will look at you and will audit you. So this was the first thing that I thought. And the second thing was that CPA license allows you really to go through a very, I would call it, deep understanding of how the business is reflected eventually in the financials. And one of the things that I was always attracted, I would say, in business is, how do you make sure, and especially, by the way, when you're a publicly traded company, how do you make sure that your business is well reflected in accounting? Because accounting principles, especially over the last few years, become more and more economic in nature. You find more and more accounting principles and accounting, I would call it, practices that are making, first of all, financial statements almost impossible to read, even for CPAs, by the way, in order to understand where the business is. And
what do you mean by that? So it's not reflected because of GAAP versus non-GAAP,
GAAP
or what?
Becomes much more complex and much more economic by nature. For example, there is a GAAP rule that says, how do you need to reflect the fact that if you have a long-term office leasing, how do you need to reflect that in the books? And basically, by the way, even though
we do a lot of that, right?
Of course.
Okay, very much.
No, but that's why also
ASC 42, IFRS 16, putting leases on the balance sheet.
Exactly.
Huge
so now,
change the past years.
Imagine, if you read the financials of a company right now, a tech company that just leases an office for 15 years, you'll see that they have a huge asset on their balance sheet. It's not their asset, actually.
Yeah.
And they have a very big financial liability or loan. It's not really a loan. It's simply right of use. And within this kind of environment, where GAAP becomes much more economic in sense, because you can say that, yes, if you're sitting in an office for 15 years, you have a right of use, and this right of use has a value. On the day-to-day business, if you just read the financials, you don't understand what it means to the business. In some cases, in SolarEdge, we give 25 years warranty, and we give, by the way, 25 years as part of the product of access to data. And you need to defer revenues, and you need to treat some of the revenues that you receive as if it was a loan, and there is interest income that comes instead of revenues. It's complex. And eventually, one of the things that I always wanted, and this is why it was so important for me to understand the GAAP, is say, okay, this is GAAP. This is how legislation, the regulator would like you to reflect things, but you need to be able to explain your investors eventually what is the business, what is the essence of the business. And for me, studying CPA was simply a mean to make sure that I know how to translate between the financials, my investors, my management, my shareholders, how to translate and how to mitigate and make sure that they all understand what's happening. So the first thing was, you need to be a CPA in order to be a good CFO later. Once you become a CFO, sometimes, it's luck. Sometimes it's your personality. Sometimes it's the company that you're growing and its abilities. I'm not sure that I have a recipe of how to become a CFO from being an accountant or assistant controller. But I would say that the journey that you're making, I think, and if I would need to give an advice one day to the soon-to-be CFO or aspiring to be a CFO, is that be a manager in your company that wears the finance hat. But first of all, you're a manager in this company. A CFO is a part of the management team. He needs to drive the business. He's not just recording, the results. He's part of the business itself. You must be a manager that is involved in everything other than finance, by the way, and take responsibility on finance. And the ability to grow there, in my view, at least for me, was always that I was able, as a assistant controller, director of finance, VP finance, and then a CFO, able to bring much more value than just being the top accountant in the company. And when we'll talk about AI, I think that this is a huge opportunity actually to grow as a financial, I would call it finance executive, because it takes away a lot of this tedious gray work that sometimes you need to do simply because, yes, you're still in charge of finance. So that was the route.
It's very interesting. And it kind of gives me reassurance if I'm someone who aspires to be an accountant or a CPA. You can feel a little bit dejected right now because people are talking about they're uncertain about the future of a CPA, or there's this AI that's some sort of macro job killer or whatever it is. But I think to your point, the CPA, it gives you the core to begin with, right? Accounting, but that doesn't mean you're an accountant for 30 years. It means that you have the core. Just make sure you don't stay in the spreadsheet too long, or stay in and look around you and look at the business and look at your client. And GAAP is GAAP, but there's much more outside of GAAP.
Exactly.
So the idea is no, jump right in because you need a core language. There's a reason accounting has lasted for decades and will take us for centuries. It's the language of business, and it's an important foundation, but that doesn't mean it's the end all, right? You eventually grow into who you become.
I definitely agree with it. And I would say one more thing, and again, maybe it's not true for those who will become an auditors, because it's a little bit of a different profession, by the way. But at least one of the things that really is, and I felt it as a CFO in all of the jobs that I had, is the fact that, when you're a chief operational officer, life is relatively simple in the sense that, you know what you have to do. You know that everything you do is for the business, and you know that everything that you do is related to your obligation, to make more products or to make sure that everything clicks. When you're a CFO, it's a unique position within management where you are the representative of a world that usually the CEO, the COO, the CRO do not know. They do not care about it. A CRO would usually care about revenues. He would not care about how does the structure of a deal is actually impacting revenues, and whether a decision that he makes that is short-term may impact the company on the longer term. He may not understand what is the implication of, by the way, making mistakes in revenues or something like this. And when you're a CFO, you come to the company being, first of all, the front line of, I would call it, managing risks for the company. Most people, when they run a company, they don't think about the risks. They think about the opportunity. We can grow revenues. We can grow the business. They don't think about the risks that can happen even if you're growing. And as a CFO, you come, and on one hand, you're a part of this team that needs to take the company into the success, to growth, to increase, and at the same time, to make sure that you manage the risks. There is no better way to understand what the risks are and to manage them without having the CPA knowledge, because this training, which is, by the way, it's awfully tough. it's very hard studies in university. I remember everyone in university, celebrating, going to parties while we're, studying like crazy for exams and everything.
CPAs, and you got to do ongoing.
And then CPA, 2 years of internship, and the bar exams are so awful. And say, why do I need it? Because it forges in your capabilities and in your mindset what should be the mindset of the person who's in charge of the risks. And when you are becoming, again, finance executive, it is not just the opportunity. You're the one who's being paid, who's being accounted for as the one who needs to make sure that everyone is kept safe. So I would say, as tough as it is, don't give up the CPA license, don't give up the CPA degree, because I truly believe that it gives you a very powerful tool that makes you, by the way, very strong within your own management and within your own company, because it's almost a superpower that you have where the others don't have it.
Yeah, and it's also interesting. You mentioned the word risk a few times. So first of all, if I'm thinking about going to be a CPA or an accountant, that just inspired me, right? Like, and I think it's meaningful. And what I've learned, as an entrepreneur the past, I guess, few years is when you jump into Startup Nation, or, I was living in New York, huge startup scene, San Francisco, Silicon Valley, wherever you are, if you're living in the startup world, it's a risk-taking world. Okay. Everyone's taking risks. We're talking about, you look at a company, they have 20, 30, 100 people, or they just announced a $30 million round. They don't even have $30 in revenue, right? And so when you're, graduating college and people are going to startups, or you're an entrepreneur and people are raising money, I think what you realize is nobody's thinking about risk. And so a little bit of the importance of the accountant or the CFO goes away because they're the risk officer, right? Now, at Trullion, we've scaled, seed round, A round, B round, passing 10 million in revenue. And all of a sudden, everything you're saying is like touching my heart, Ronen, right? Like, no offense, but if you would have said it 3 years ago, I would have been like, well, I want the CRO. I just want the growth or whatever it is. But now it's funny, as a CEO, like the CFO and the CEO become so much more aligned on these things. And so I think as an accountant, like to get to be as more closely aligned with the overall business versus CROs here, CMOs here, I think is a really exciting proposition. And I've felt it a lot just over the years, going from early stage startup to real company, real risk. I want to be aligned with the CFO. But I have a more challenging thought because one thing I've learned is the accountant, the chief accountant or the chief financial officer, to your point, they do have to challenge the different people at the table. The revenue officer just wants revenue. The marketing just wants a marketing budget. And I'm sure challenging that. What's like one or two things where you would challenge the CEO? A couple examples where you would walk in, because I'm like the CFO. I'm thinking about all this stuff, top line, bottom line, everything. What are some typical things that a CEO comes in where the chief financial officer, accountant says, stop where you are?
So it's, I think it's very much different between between companies, between CEOs, CFOs, and I'll try to give an example, but it's based on my experience and where I used to challenge. And I think that it also comes back to part of, what you need to carry as a kind of your own truth. And I'll explain in a second. As I said before, I think that it's mostly around managing risks. By the way, it's not avoiding risks.
Right.
Companies must take risks in order to grow. Company that doesn't take risk will not grow and will never succeed. But risk needs to be managed. And I think that what you usually see is that CEOs would take risks because they're in charge on the growth. And by the way, sometimes as entrepreneurs, they're more brave than I am, sometimes, or fearless than fearless than I am. And your job is to challenge them, by the way, even to light for them some of the corners that they don't look at when it comes. So I'll give you a few examples that I used to challenge Guy. Guy was the amazing founder of SolarEdge,
right.
A bold person, very thorough thinker, but he was fearless. And I needed to challenge him on places where he thinks that we need to jump 2 miles, and I say whether it is 1.5 miles. It was never, by the way, we don't need to jump. It was how far do we need to jump, and how do we make sure that we do it? So I'll give you 2 examples. One, for example, just imagine when you're a startup and we are fighting to raise capital, inventory management is a very big thing, because you take capital that you raised from VCs. It's a very expensive money, as you know, because you give share. It's not
you pay later.
We couldn't get loans from banks.
Yeah.
And you basically take this money, and instead of investing it in R&D, you put it in hardware, in boxes. So I used to challenge when we decided on inventory levels and manufacturing levels. Do we have enough orders? Do we feel comfortable? Sometimes you don't make 2 orders, you make 4 forecasts. Is our forecast process robust enough that you feel that we're not just spending money and maybe throwing inventory that we don't need? So that was one thing. I can tell you that was 1 year, one of my biggest fights with Guy, huge one. By the way, good fights, because we got into the room, we screamed at each other, and we went out hugging, because this is the way that you need to work, but everything needs to be on the table. It was a year, 2013, the solar business started to go down. It's a boom bust, and this was a very much of a bust area where a lot of the subsidies in Germany disappeared. We need to sit on budget. Guy thinks that we need to grow the company and hire more people. I'm the CFO. I think that we need to cut expenses. And we had a very, very intense budget discussion where everything was on the table. What are the odds? What are the risks? What are the opportunities? How do we make sure, by the way, that maybe we make a decision now, but if something changes, what is the mechanism that we have in order to make sure that something is working and we don't have an autopilot that, throw us with spending too much money? I always used to challenge almost on everything, because, by the way, and over time, it was my job to challenge it, also because he knew that when he thinks of something, he needs someone to balance him. So I would say challenge almost everything, but especially on areas that you think that maybe the thought process was not complete. Maybe the process of getting to the decision was not taking into account all of the elements. And sometimes, by the way, even if it's a bold move and a risky move, let's just make sure that we understand what's on the stake that we're doing. So I used to sit with Guy on a weekly basis, almost 2 to 3 hours, and we used to challenge each other on everything. But the good thing is, when it comes, and this is why I said prior to this, that you need to make sure that you come as a manager in the organization, not someone that is against the organization. If it comes without an agenda, if it comes in a way that your CEO as a CFO knows that you're cooperative, that you're working with the company, when it comes without any agenda that is just for the sake of reducing your stress, your risk that you take upon yourself, but because it is done from a very non-agenda bearing direction, it usually works. You're expected to challenge the CEO.
It's so interesting. And by the way, these little anecdotes are fascinating. Okay. I can, there's some accountants that are working at startups and they might hear inventory, and we don't have inventory, we're software. But first of all, there's a lot of other verticals out there, of course. And also, I think a CFO's impact or an accountant's impact is really playing on the margins, right? If I have 5% more or less inventory, how much more can I invest in R&D, right? And it's not just about these binary decisions. It's about optimizing every aspect of the business, ultimately to create probably just more efficient, better jobs, better people, better quality of life, more revenue. It's all an equation. It really resonates with me. I'll tell you, like from the CEO's chair, right? So you mentioned, like, instead of going 2 miles, just go 1.5 miles. Make sure there's an agenda. Make sure it's clear. Make sure you're coming from a place. Just last night, I had a discussion with an investor, and that investor gave me an idea, a very important idea. This is for Trullion. Let's see if it comes out one day. But I loved the idea. Okay. And I was ready to walk in to the office today and implement that idea. And then I carpooled with someone this morning in the car. And I shared the idea. And this is let's just say it's a former CFO, actually. And he gave me the opposite idea. And I walked into the office holding on to that opposite idea. I'm a CEO, I'm an entrepreneur. I'm expected to run this organization, and I am holding two opposing ideas that within 24 hours I was equally as enthusiastic about, right? So the importance of a well-founded accounting, finance background, a CFO with managerial skills, you mentioned truth, like a core truth, would be so valuable for me right now. Someone, a CFO, financial partner who can hear those two amazing ideas, because believe me, a lot of times without a CFO or without an accounting partner, one of those ideas gets actioned. And it's the idea that happened to be the most valid at that moment. That is how CEOs and entrepreneurs often work. I'll admit my guilt. But it's just reassuring and kind of refreshing to hear that.
I would say one thing about this.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that you'll always get the best result, or that you'll do the best, you'll adopt the best idea. It doesn't mean that that's the case. But I think that what it does make is that at least the process is a little bit better. I can tell you that I was wrong many times in some of the ideas I had. And in many cases where I took the more bearish position towards Guy that was always a bull, he in many cases was right while I was wrong in some of the cases. But I think that what really makes the CFO-CEO connection work well is the ability to, first of all, never look at things as if it's I'm winning or I'm losing, but it's rather that we are getting the right process. It's good to have sometimes bad outcome out of a good process, because I think that if the process is good, in 80%, you'll come out with a good result. In 80%, so 20% is not a bad result, to come up with it. If you do everything else very good. So I think that it doesn't ensure that you will get to the best result, but at least you make sure that the process was right, and it's important.
Yeah, very interesting. So just a rapid fire question on that. In the process, what percentage of the information do you feel you need to make the decision? Some people say I need 80%, I need 100%. Some people say 51%. Give us a sense to make that decision and not keep going with the process.
So I'd say that around 70%. And by the way, and again, it's very hard to give a numeric result, but 70 represents, in my view, two things. First of all, is that you're always you're too far from 100%. Okay, so 95% is not good. It's too far because the pace of making decision is relatively quick.
Yeah.
And again, when we'll talk about, the AI and its abilities, I think that this is shortening this gap between the 70% to 100 tremendously, because sometimes a lot of the data is already there. It just takes a lot of time to get it. But I think that you need to be at around 70% because you need to make sure that you have enough substance that you can really judge what are the circumstances and have a good grasp of the potential results that you have there. But you need to understand that you will always be far from knowing everything and having everything. And if you expect to be at 100% knowledge of the data, you will never make a decision. Not making a decision is the worst decision to make. So I would say 70.
It's interesting. It's good we got some numbers here. And I think that's going to resonate, because when you go into a career like accounting where you're a risk officers do end up in no decisions a lot of times.
Yes.
Right. And so it's important that just to understand that a no decision is a risk too. And we're going to get to A&I in a second, but we're going to take a step up. So we started in Netanya, we got to CPA. Were you at the Big Four?
No. Actually, it was a deliberate decision. Today, it wouldn't work. But when I graduated, I knew that I don't want to be a CPA. So I could still go to a small firm that was auditing NASDAQ traded companies.
Okay.
At that time, it was still acceptable. And to go out quickly. And the funny thing was that, internship in Israel is 2 years. After 2 years and 1 day in internship, I started to work in a tech company.
Oh,
so I
very
decided deliberately not to
What was
go.
the firm called? Or is it?
No, today it doesn't exist. It was called Bruckner Rosenthal.
Oh, there you go. Okay. By the way, when you work at CPA firms that are not the big four, you just learn a lot of last names. You learn a lot of last names. I've never heard of that name.
Yeah.
But
no, it doesn't exist anymore. An amazing school, by the way.
Yeah. Well, I'm a big proponent of going to the small company that's a little bit messier than the big company and learning through that. So going to that firm, year 2, day 1, going to the tech company, rising, you mentioned, from assistant controller all the way to CFO. Let's just go one step up now to another, I think, dream of a financial officer accountant is getting to be a board member, right? You mentioned Kaltura, Cato Networks. Those are fast-growing companies.
And Monday.com.
And Money.com. And that's what I wanted to mention. Money.com recently, I think, publicly passed $1 billion in revenue. That company was just started about a decade ago, right? That's an incredible growth story. There's many like that in Israel and around the world. But just give us a sense, take us into the boardroom of maybe a little bit about what you can and can't do as a board member in terms of influencing operation, how it changes from the beginning where you're day-to-day accountant and then CFO, you're a little bit over the business. And then at the board level, you're seeing them once a quarter, maybe having monthly or weekly calls. What's it like as the board member, former CFO?
Sure. So I think it's first of all a little bit of a shift of your mind, knowing that you're not managing the company. Moving to the other side of the table is a mental step that you need to take. And I think that it goes to the roles of the board, and I will explain in a second. On one hand, of course, again, you don't do the day-to-day work. You will never know the details. And by the way, we CFOs, we finance people are usually very much detailed people. We know how to drill down. We know how to get into the details. It's harder to do it when you're a board member because you don't live the day-to-day of a company. You need to be prepared to the fact that sometimes your opinion will be heard, but not accepted. And this is something that you need to be able to live with. You're not managing the company. Once you've crossed this chasm, knowing that you're moving to the other side, it very much depends on the company and your personality. I must say that me, as a board member, first of all, I try as much as possible to bring value. It's a kind of a multifaceted job that you need to do. The first one, by the way, as a board member, you are representing the shareholders of the company. So here, actually, my role is to oversee what the company is doing and make sure that they do everything in the right way so that the financial processes are in place, that the reporting makes sense, that the work with the auditors is working, that the finance people, personnel, size of the department really fits the mission, and that the process of eventually reporting to the shareholders is right. This oversight is very important because this is my fiduciary obligation to the shareholders. And that means, by the way, that even if you're not sitting with a company and give advice to management, this is part of your obligation. So you need to make sure that you do it. How do you do it? In my view, is also merging with the other aspect. And this is really to be a sounding board to the management and help them. This is its board of directors. It's not just auditors or someone who's just overseeing everything. And here, I think that they merge because by making sure that the company is being run properly, where the processes are right, you help management. And here, when I go to a board, sitting in a board of a company, the first thing that I do is that I try to be much more in touch with the company rather than coming once a quarter to the committees or to the company and just ask the question after receiving the materials. So I sit with the CFOs quite often. I try to be, by the way, an ear for them when they need an advice, when they need to ask a question, when they need a sounding board, because sometimes they do not have it. I'm trying to sit with executives that are not from finance because I want to understand what's happening in sales, what's happening in R&D. By the way, when I on a board, I sit for 1 or 2 days with the technology people to understand the product. I try to play with the product because you need to make sure that you do it. And of course, sitting with the CEOs at least once a quarter, but being available as much as they need for questions or to get an advice. So I would call it's a relatively involved board member kind of position that I'm trying to take. But again, always remembering, I'm not managing it And second, I have an obligation to also make sure that they do things right. If all works well, and I'm very lucky to sit in 3 amazing companies where managements are, first of all, best of class entrepreneurs and great companies and great, by the way, people, that I enjoy working with, which is also important. But I think that all of them have the importance of corporate governance, the importance of doing things right and building things right as a top priority for them. I'm very happy because it reduces my risks, but also make me, I think, more capable of helping them because we don't fight. We simply work together and we're able to see things in the same way. And therefore, the board can really advise. And again, knowing that not all the time the advice is taken, but we can start at the very, I would call it, clean level where we simply see the aim, the goals, the targets in the same way.
Very nice. And I can tell you, on the startup journey and the entrepreneurial journey, you appreciate your board more and more over time. And you mentioned just really being a sounding board. What happens, I think, especially in the startup journey, is you start out and you don't necessarily proactively seek your board, right? But over time, a moment comes up, okay? And it's a vulnerable moment. And instead of 10 employees, you have 100 employees. And if you can call your board member and they can answer that specific question with clarity for you, it's worth the world, right? And again, connecting it, to be able to answer that question, Ronen, you need a lot of that experience and all those motions in the accounting team and in the operational team and everything to be able to be ready for that moment. That's awesome. You also, those 3 companies we mentioned all have really fun products. So it's easier to play. And
none of them, by the way, is a hardware product, which is also interesting.
Exactly. So you got software. And by the way, I should mention that, Trullion, Monday.com is a customer, SolarEdge is a customer. So if those hit your desk and got your blessing, we appreciate that. But one of the things we've been doing at Trullion is really applying AI to finance and accounting, which I think our early cases were things like lease accounting and revenue recognition. Now we've moved on to audit, external, internal, and this broader AI automation for finance. We'll jump into the specifics, but it's early 2025. You're a financial leader par excellence. Where are we on the curve of AI in finance? How much of it is real? How much of it is hype? How far away are we from the really cool, meaningful things? Put us somewhere.
So I think that we're very much at the beginning of it.
Okay.
At the very beginning of it. And by the way, and this is already a big step compared to where we were like 3 years ago or 4 years ago, and especially when it comes to automation. But I think that we're at the very beginning. And I think that one of the facts that prove this is that you see more and more startups in what we call the CFO suite in this area, because for many years, accounting was simply not interesting enough for startups. And I think that spending on finance was always seen as maybe waste of money if you can put it in another CRM or something. But the 2 things that are happening is that, first of all, I think that the gap that was created in the accounting area and other areas when it comes to the tools that can support decisions is becoming too big. And I think that also the requirements by the regulator, by the auditors, by the way, the authorities, the requirements of tedious, hard work that is sometimes doesn't have a lot of added value is increasing so much that it puts a very big stress on the finance departments and really distracts them from the ability to make decisions based on information and not just data. You see that today, a lot of finance departments are recording data, trying to query for data. They don't get the ability to really drive data-driven information. And I think that AI, and here it's amazing because a lot of the processes in finance are repetitive, very, very structured. So AI is exactly what is needed for those. By automating this, you can really free up finance people to give the added value. I still think that what we see is very little. I think that we're almost, if we take it to the computing world, the Commodore 64 or a Sinclair Spectrum.
Right.
We're far from other places. I think that we're at the very beginning.
Very nice. And we agree there that we're at the beginning. I'll just tell you a quick story because it made me think of it. At Trullion, we started in 2019, 2020. I was coming from Texas and New York. I'd come with my wife, my family for about a year in Israel at the time, and had this idea applying AI to accounting. Mm-hmm. And first I pitched the Israeli VCs, mm-hmm. and I did not get any interest. Mm-hmm. Not only that, but it was like we were speaking a different language. Mm-hmm. Fortunately, when COVID hit, we started going Zoom to the American VCs. Now, there's just a small distinction. The Israeli VC world 5 years ago was much more optimized on early stage startups, less accounting demands, mm-hmm. right? So these weren't, like if I had talked to you, you would have understood, but you may have been one of the few true CFOs, public company audited, stuff like that. A lot of the US VCs had been through a couple cycles of IPOs and M&A, and so they understood accounting and audit, and it resonated with them, right? Fast forward to 2025, there are 24 legitimate Israeli startups in the office of the CFO. They're probably mm-hmm. calling you and many of your other peers, backed by really, really impactful investors, but they're saying the same things that we were saying 3 or 4 or 5 years ago. So it's just really interesting how there's been this kind of enthusiasm in the market towards the office of the CFO tools. I guess one thought or question to you is, when you look at AI in accounting, is too much emphasis going into AI and accounting tools when it comes to the investment and the ideas, or is it not enough? Like you're saying, we're in the beginning. Are we catching up in terms of investing and trying and doing all these tools? Or does there need to be more? What do you think?
So again, I'm starting from the fact that it needs to be more, because again, okay. I think that today you see too little of tools that are actually being used. And by the way, part of it is because that a lot of finance departments and finance heads are a little bit hesitant in adopting new technology sometimes. So should the more be on the finance and accounting teams? I mean, they're reading LinkedIn every day and they're mm-hmm. AI this, AI that. And you're saying they should be leaning in even more? Because I can tell you the tools are out there. No, for sure.
Me and my peers.
I think that it's for sure it's there.
Yeah.
For sure it's there. By nature, by the way, finance people are usually not the guys who run after new things and are very open to new ideas, Yeah. So sometimes we're attracted to these worlds, we people. But in many senses, I think that it's a combination of several things. One, first of all, people that are actually involved in the day-to-day repetitive jobs of finance are afraid to lean towards these new tools because it threatens their jobs. Okay. So by definition, they're a little bit more concerned. A lot of time you see that financial managers are not willing to take this step in because they're either overwhelmed with the amount of job that they say. I can tell you, at least in SolarEdge, we used to have, I would say in the last year, at least 15 startups knocking on our doors asking to adopt the product or to try it.
In finance.
Yeah,
we knocked.
At least. I know. And we did, by the way. But you cannot do everything. And by the way, each and every idea was good. But at the end, you cannot. Today, there is overwhelming amount of ideas compared to the time that people can actually dedicate in order to actually take them. And I think that you're starting from what's more painful for you. So for us, again, it was this leasing standard. It was extremely painful that you were able to very well fulfill this need for us. But I think that, first of all, it's the time needed. And second, I don't think that AI tools yet passed, at least when it comes to the pitch, the point of being a hyped ideas translated into a capability that shows the CFO, here you can save this and this amount of time when you close the financials.
Okay.
This and this time that you can do. I can tell you that automation is usually easier easier to be implemented by companies, because automation is very easy to see what's the benefit and how much it can save. And I think that the way to resolve and to see results is relatively quickly. The more advanced tools when it comes to cash flow management,
right?
Most companies still manage cash flow in Excel.
Yeah,
it doesn't make any sense.
Guilty.
Well,
right.
If you look at, by the way, just think of the time that is needed to query data, especially if you work with the large ERP systems. Querying data is huge pain. If you think at AI, I think the data should be at your tip of your fingers so easily. And by the way, when we talked about 70% of data when you make a decision, I think with the right AI tools, and if you do everything needed to make sure that the data is prepared for these tools and maintained in the right way. But if you use the same tools, you can get to 85% of the data. Today, most of the decisions are not taken where you have enough data because you don't have enough time and enough tools to query the data. AI can shorten this because you'll have more free people to do other things that can be automated, and you'll have much better tools to extract the data very quickly. I'm looking still for ChatGPT, where when a tool where I ask, what were my sales in 2025 to this and this segment, that I can get the result within one prompt on my computer, and to get the data that I feel that is reliable and not just a black box, because I'll be afraid of black box. If I can get reliable data, that's just amazing. Because today, when I ask this question, sometimes it's 3 hours until I get the answer. I can get it now with AI.
By the way, Ronen, if you can get it in 3 hours, you're ahead of me. Okay. Sometimes it takes us 3 days, right? Okay, so let's take the cash flow example, right? On one hand, we hear that AI is in the beginning, and it's so powerful, and it has an opportunity to transform finance and accounting, which we agree with. And then on the other hand, finance are slow; they're the last adopters, slow adopters, risk averse, and everything like that. And then I heard something in between, which is like, yeah, and then sometimes when we see these tools, they're not above the threshold for us to adopt. Either they need to be so good that we stop everything, or they need to fit a specific pain point. So let's take cash flow, for example, that's in the spreadsheets. What's stopping you or your company that's in spreadsheets from adopting the cash flow tool? Because I know there's 10 out there. There's 3 probably in Israel. I have a couple friends that do one. Is the tool not good enough? Do you not have the time? Are you waiting? Are you stuck in Excel? Where are we today, and does it change in a year? So
again, I think it's a very much company specific question, but I would say that if I'll try to rank them, the first one is that it's a kind of a vicious circle. The people are working too hard on their Excels, and they don't have time to really free time in order to adopt the tool. Sometimes it happens, by the way. The second thing I believe is really the fear of making a change. It's simply change management. People that say, okay, I have a job today, I have knowledge. Maybe it's my job security. It's the ability to know and to understand that adopting a tool makes you better, makes you more valuable, because you bring data, you bring actionable data, is something that I still believe it's an obstacle that most people did not come. So I would say time, first of all, change management, and then comes the tools. Because if you have a good partner, and one of the best things that I see with the startups today, they say, hey, be my design partner. Help me be better. I'll design everything for you. So you don't have just a tool like Salesforce today that is so mature that you need to take it, and you need to take professional services. And if you need something from Salesforce, God knows if they'll help you. So many startups saying, work with me, be my design partner. I will make sure that you will get a very quick resolution for problems. I think that once a decision is made and the time is dedicated, I think that you can very easily adopt those tools. And I think it's going to be a little bit of an almost exponential growth in the adoption that you will see, because you already start to see companies that are adopting, and then it becomes almost the standard, and then the tools are becoming so much easier to implement and better that you'll see this exponential adoption.
It's interesting, and we don't know when the exponential curve is going to happen. We feel like it's coming. Obviously, it's going to have a big impact. I mean, do you expect any, let's just call it major disruption coming? And I'll get more specific, because like with change management, when you sit there and say there's this awesome thing, but there's some change management issues, sometimes the change management happens. It just gets forced in. Sometimes that awesome technology comes through a different angle, or it changes in a different way. And I can't even say that because we can't predict it. When you think about the structure of a CFO, I'm a CFO. I've got my accounting team. Let's call that close, backwards looking. I've got my finance team. Let's call that a little bit more forward looking. I've got my auditor. Maybe I've got my advisory partner, right? Those are 5 different parties. Let's throw another one in there, my ERP, my system of record, Oracle, NetSuite, whatever it is. Are there any of those players in there that are going to be most impacted by AI when it comes in, and how?
So first of all, I think that if I need to rank them by order, I think accounting will be the first.
Okay.
Simply because, again, it's repetitive, very predictable things, and I think that automation can greatly improve them. So I would say accounting first.
So just quickly on accounting, because that's our favorite. How does that change my senior accountant or controller? What am I doing now? What am I doing in 5 years with AI?
I would say that today you are 70% of your time working to record data and analyze and maybe prepare data, and then 30% analyzing. I think that within 3-4 years, 70% of the time you'll be analyzing and bringing the meaning of the data, and only 30% will deal with the data itself, with recording, making sure that it's right, and querying this data.
Okay, this is a tough question. Does my team size change at companies with accounting teams? Does my role change at companies?
So I would say that, maybe from my short time as managing the company, I would say, I would like to see a smaller team, because now I have all of these automated tools. I think that teams will remain at the same size, but you'll see a shift in what they do. I think that they will provide much more. The power of data is there. I think that you'll find the same size of people or same size of group, but you will find that the majority of the group is providing much more accurate, actionable data compared to the past. And by the way, once organizations get good actionable data, they get addicted to it.
Right.
So I don't think that you will see smaller finances. I think that you'll see a much more professional finance when it comes to analysis and data-driven decision-making finance, rather than a company that or a group that is recording data, making reports, and then send it for a quick analysis. It'll simply shift. You won't see less people, I believe.
Very interesting. So same amount of people. You're the CFO. Maybe let's throw another thing. Like I'll just tell you another thing interesting. We're like the old guys now. Like doing AI for 5 years is like 1.0. Whatever it is. What's interesting is at Trullion, we serve the CFO, the corporate controller, essentially, but we also serve the auditor, and we've been saying that from day one. And part of it came from my experience of going through these new standards, lease accounting and RevRec. And I said, hey, we as the corporate accounting team are doing all this work, and it's just a bunch of document reading and spreadsheets, and nothing's going in the ERP, right? Because SAP or Oracle didn't have the module. Wait, and you're telling me that our auditors, who we also pay, have to recreate this, but they're relying on SAP, right? That's their sampling engine. And so I've always been very interested in this idea of the two sides of the market and maybe some inefficiencies here. Now, what I've learned is, obviously audit is a highly regulated world, and there's reasons for those independence protections. But talking to an auditor 5 years ago, EY, PwC, is completely different than talking today. And I'm telling you, in the past year, something has changed. We're working with one of the big four right now, and I can look at my emails from 2021, and they just did not care, wouldn't listen. And now it's changed. And what's interesting is the people are different. It's a different person, right? And so I just want to reflect maybe a little bit more. You're the CFO because a lot of your job is working with external auditors, advisory firms, regulators. do you think that the service industry gets maybe disrupted more, integrated more? Is there any impact there? You talked about the internal accounting team. What about external accounting?
No, so for sure, I think it's the same process that is happening because first of all, again, when you're looking at and when you talk about advisory, there's a difference, I think, between the auditors and advisory services that are not later being audited by the PCAOB.
Right.
When it comes to the auditor, it's all about risk management.
Yeah.
It's all about risk management. Now, the tools for the auditors to make a very thorough audit prior to having more and more technology, more and more AI, more and more data was very much limited. The amount of work that they needed to do, especially in large companies, because of lack of automation, really did not allow them to find real issues. I see today when the auditors come, first of all, they take your data to run on their systems.
Right.
Your accounting is now completely exposed to them.
Yeah.
In the past, they used to sample.
Yeah.
And I always used to laugh that if I want to do something, I'll just write, in my P&L, I'll call it, embezzlement, Ronen, $499,000 because their threshold is $500,000 and they wouldn't find it. Today, it wouldn't fly.
Or if you had an embezzlement invoice, if it matched, you would be fine.
Exactly. Yes. But that's the thing, and today they take all of the data. They can go to smaller areas. Now, I think that over time, what will happen is that they will rely more and more, if there are standardized systems, I think that they can rely more and more on those systems. So it makes their work much more precise, much more, much less riskier in a sense, and I think much more efficient. I think that what you will need to see over time is that the systems can actually talk to each other relatively okay. So if you have a Trullion system that is adopted by the Big Four and they say, we trust Trullion, we know that whatever is coming from this is certified. It's not a black box where maybe it's a black box, but I know how the result is being produced. The audit of EY on my leasing accounting is going to be much easier. So I think that it will change significantly. And again, I think that's part of where the world is going to evolve. The existence of data, the existence of the ability to extract data easily, to analyze it in large masses is something that is growing. And I think that the more it is being standardized, the auditors will benefit, the companies will benefit, will not have to fight on did it happen or did it not. I think that's going to be much easier. And maybe the last thing I would say around this is that I think that you mentioned it, and I wanted to mention it also before. What will really change is that my 16-year-old son is native to AI right now.
Yeah.
He's doing so much with AI. The next auditor, 4 years from now, 5 years from now, will come from this generation.
Yeah.
When they will come, it will not even be a question whether AI is needed or how relevant it is. It will be how much of it I'm using. And I think that that's part of the thing that will change. People are simply growing this technology.
Amazing. Okay, this has just been a bundle of wisdom and good stuff. So maybe to kind of wrap it up, or last thought, you mentioned your 16-year-old son, but maybe it's your son, maybe it's someone who's going to college, maybe it's someone who's graduating college. What's your advice today for people entering the working world, thinking about an accounting career, perhaps? What do you say to them?
So I really come back to one of the sentences I said before. It very much depends what you want to be.
Yes.
But if you want to be an executive in a company, which I think I figure a CFO is the most important, other than the CEO, is make sure that you are a management member wearing the finance hat. Make sure that your finance department is not a department that is stopping things or being feared of and getting very less cooperation. Make sure that you are adding value to each and every process. My biggest, I would say, achievement in SolarEdge was, for example, or one of the biggest, that my team together with I formed our first distribution center in the Netherlands for SolarEdge. Finance department took a project of building a warehouse that is distributing our products all over the Netherlands and Europe, and it was finance. And the reason that it was finance, it was because operations said, we entrust finance to do it good. and the CEO knew that as a CFO, I'm not just making financial statements. I have the business judgment that I can operate. I think that once you become a management member that wears the CFO hat, you're bound to success, because eventually what organizations are usually missing is good management, not good accountants, but good managers. And the CFOs are usually very good tools. So I would tell, plan to be a CFO, but plan to be a manager in the organization. That's what you should do.
Amazing. I love it. I'm really happy we got to connect.
Thank you very much.
We'll check in on this in a year from now in the AI crystal ball, and hopefully get to talk a lot more. But thanks again for your time.
Thank you very much, and thank you for hosting me.
All right, cool.
Thanks.
Thanks.